Australia and was now assigned to the Royal Armoured Corps as a tank driver with C Squadron 8th Hussars. After a successful Normandy landing near Arromanches, his Cromwell tank moved on towards Germany. At last, he had an active role and new friends with a common goal despite their different backgrounds.
It was wonderful. For me, it was the best thing that could happen in my life. Not that I say I was out for revenge, but I did it. Yes, I enjoyed it. I was treated very well. They all knew where I came from. They all knew my religion. I was one of them, and I maintained one of them, and that was a wonderful thing.
The success of D-Day breathed new life into the Allied campaign, and the Nazi war machine began to wobble. Cat Adams 609 squadron rocket-firing Typhoons were devastating enemy targets across northern France, but success came at a very high personal price.
Team spirit became contagious. But when you see the entries in my logbook, Woody shot down, went down in flames. You know, a friend of mine for over a year, I didn't reveal my emotions. Tough luck, I used to put it. That's not me. It was like protecting myself against any emotion, you know. Your best friend suddenly exploded in flames. But your first reaction was not the poor guy, but the first reaction was, thank God it's not me. Then once you landed, the other reaction came in. And you said, oh my God, you know, that was awful.
Ken's squadron was now targeting German troops and tanks trapped in the Falaise area of France. Pilots rarely witness at close quarters the impact of their airborne attacks. But on a day off, his commanding officer invited Ken to examine the devastation on the ground.
The smell was terrible. And then after an hour, we got eventually to the actual area of Falaise. And then you saw the SS already bloated and with worms and so on. It was pretty horrifying. And they asked me to take one of the VW staff cars and drive it back to the squadron. We tried to use a disinfectant on the sort of plastic or whatever. We could never get rid of the smell of death, the sweet smell of death. Terrifying.
As the British forces advanced through northern France, Harry Rossany was asked to stay on in Normandy. A signwriter by trade, his skills were now needed to mark the graves of thousands of fallen soldiers.
We stood on the canvas outside Bayeux in my company, and I was called away, the first to be called away. Why? Because I had this signwriting skill, and I was needed, because the dead piled up and they had to have crosses. And there was no one there to write the crosses except yours truly, trained. So I was seconded to Graves Registration Unit, and that was my lot. I had to stay there. Not that I wanted to. I was very unhappy to do that. But they said, look, who else can do it? It was a sad time. It was a bloody awful time. It really was. Never again. Sorry.
As the German army retreated, Willie Field's 8th Hussars pushed on through France, Belgium, and into Holland. Having forged a close bond with his British colleagues, Willie was heading back towards Germany with a real chance of avenging his murdered family and confronting the people who had destroyed his life. But his optimism was short-lived.
And this is the spot approximately where my tank was knocked out. I can show you actually on the map, an old map which I have here, where it is approximately between Schindel and Wegel. And we must have been on our way to Nijmegen.
Suddenly, his tank took a direct hit from a German anti-tank gun.
It was such a tremendous bang that it must have been an 88 millimeter, and it went straight through the turret. And when I got out, I got straight up to the turret and I saw the terrible things in the turret. They were all dead, I thought, but my wireless operator was still alive. And I managed to pull him out and put him behind the tank. But then another 88 must have hit the tank and threw me approximately 20 yards off my tank onto the floor and wounded me in my leg. And luckily they collected him, but unfortunately he died on his way to the hospital.
Willie had lost every single man in his crew in one day.
It was like a family. Sleep together, you work together, you eat together. It's like a family. And to lose a family like this was very, very difficult for me to get over it.
As well as losing his mates, Willie seemed to have lost the opportunity to avenge the atrocities he had suffered. By now, Hitler's Germany faced the real prospect of a humiliating defeat. Yet Lord Haw-Haw's broadcasts were now more fanatical than ever.
The British Ministry of Misinformation has been frightening British women and girls.
In the fields of northern France, Harry Rosny was surrounded by death. In an extraordinary coincidence, he stumbled upon the grave of an old school friend, who he last saw more than 700 miles away in Berlin.
And I came across this little homemade shallow grave with Heinz Brandt on it. And Heinz Brandt was my friend who sat next to me at school. He was a lovely boy. He was my best friend, so gentle. I picture him today, a lovely fellow, and a good footballer.
Years after they had fled the Nazis, the refugees were about to return to Germany, but now they were in British uniforms.
Crossing over from Holland into Germany, a completely involuntary reaction of goose pimples that were much more than goose pimples. I was back and I was incredibly conscious of the uniform I was wearing.
Willie, still reeling from the death of his tank crew, was back with C Squadron and partnered with a high-ranking officer of the 8th Hussars. His determination to defeat Hitler's Germany was absolute.
When we went into France, we liberated France. When we went into Holland, we liberated Holland. But when we into Germany, we won. We beat them. You know, we done what we wanted to do. We won the war. That's it.
But the exhilaration of victory was soon shaken by the graphic evidence of what the Nazis had done to German Jews in concentration camps. Geoffrey Perry had witnessed the carnage of the Falaise Gap in northern France. Now, as he was entering the Bergen-Belsen camp, he would experience an unprecedented degree of evil.
There's nothing quite as telling as a mountain of shoes about sort of hopelessness and deadness. To see a mountain of corpses, the grotesqueness of corpses in their different positions.
Amid the chaos, he was approached by a survivor desperate to find his son. The skeletal man handed him a letter.
And the way that I clutched that piece of paper, probably didn't clutch a piece of paper like it. With the same sort of feeling all my life.
Knowing the chances of the dying man finding his lost son were almost nil, Geoffrey gave the letter to the Red Cross. But months later, he received another letter, this time from the man's lost son.
Thank you for putting my father and I in touch. We're now reunited. You know, here I'd come across this man who whose name was Hopelessness. I think who'd sort of, in his own mind, had probably come to the end of his life, okay? And he hadn't, because father and son were reunited, and he did survive.
Pilot Ken Adam was now put in charge of thousands of Luftwaffe prisoners of war. He insisted high-ranking German officers saw for themselves the horror of Belsen.
They were still in German uniforms with their decorations and so on. We all went there. It was an unbelievable experience for the Germans. You know, they just couldn't believe it, what they saw. One of them tried to commit suicide the following night.
Germany calling. Germany calling. You are about to hear our news in English.
Lieutenant Geoffrey Perry was with Target Force, whose mission was to gain control of Nazi newspapers and radio stations. His primary objective was to take over Radio Hamburg, the suspected location of William Joyce. Lord Haw had been broadcasting his propaganda from here right up until the end of the war. Now, on the run, he was Britain's most wanted, and Geoffrey was on his trail.
We asked the same day that we arrived. As far as we were concerned, Joyce was very much still here.
On arrival at Radio Hamburg, Geoffrey discovered Joyce had left behind.
Then once you landed, the other reaction came in. And you said, oh my God, you know, that was awful.
Ken's squadron was now targeting German troops and tanks trapped in the Falaise area of France. Pilots rarely witness at close quarters the impact of their airborne attacks. But on a day off, his commanding officer invited Ken to examine the...
Out for revenge, but I did it. Yes, I enjoyed it. I was treated very well. They all knew where I came from, they all knew my religion. I was one of them, and I maintained one of them, and that was a wonderful thing.
The success of D-Day breathed new life into the Allied campaign, and the Nazi war machine began to wobble. Australia and was now assigned to the Royal Armoured Corps as a tank driver with C Squadron 8th Hussars. After a successful Normandy landing near Arromanches, his Cromwell tank moved on towards Germany. At last, he had an active role and new friends with a common goal despite their different backgrounds.
It was wonderful. For me, it was the best thing that could happen in my life. Not that I say I was...
Ken Adams' 609 Squadron rocket-firing Typhoons were devastating enemy targets across northern France, but success came at a very high personal price.
Team spirit became contagious. But when you see the entries in my logbook, Woody shot down, went down in flames. You know, a friend of mine for over a year, I didn't reveal my emotions. Tough luck, I used to put it. That's not me. It was like protecting myself against any emotion, you know. Your best friend suddenly exploded in flames. But your first reaction was not the poor guy, but the first reaction was, thank God it's not me.